Read.
Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them out of his sight.
His sight is on his holy land, Israel. Read.
There was none left but the tribe of Judah only.
And when it says there was only one left but the tribe of Judah, he was talking about kingship. Don't forget, the kingdom was split in two. Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Rehoboam was the king over Judah. Jeroboam was the king over the Indian tribes. So the only kingship would be left after that split would be Judah, the same tribe Christ came out of. Read on.
Also Judah kept not the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the statutes of Israel which they made.
Go ahead.
And the Lord rejected all the seed of Israel, and afflicted them, and delivered them into the hand of spoilers.
Delivered them into the hand of spoilers. So you want to know how Israel got so low? He allowed the nations to spoil them and to take their riches, take their power, take their land. Go ahead.
And delivered them into the hands of spoilers until he had cast them out of his sight.
Go ahead.
For he rent Israel from the house of David, and they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king. And Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord, and made them sin a great sin.
Go ahead.
For the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam which he did. They departed not from them, until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight. As he had said by all his servants the prophets, so was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day.
They was carried out of their own land unto Assyria as of this day. Now you're going to find out that they stayed in that Assyrian captivity for about 3 years. And they took counsel to come over here to the Americas. We're talking about the lost sheep now. How do we know that? In this same Apocrypha, the King James Version, which was taken out of the Holy Bible. The Catholic Church took this out of the Bible. This was actually a part of the original Bible. This is 14 books that the churches are being denied. It shows you exactly how the Northern Kingdom got here to the Americas. Go to 2nd Esdras, the 13th chapter, and the 39th verse. And then we're going into Genesis, breaking down in the latter days how to identify the lost tribes. How did they get here to the Americas? And this is about 718 BC. Okay, 721 BC is when the Assyrians came over and took over the northern kingdom, the Assyrians. They stayed in that captivity for about 3 years, to about 718 BC. And they took counsel to come over here to this new world. That's why they call it the New World. Yes, the Indians did not come through the Barren Straits 100 million years ago, or whatever things they're teaching in college. The fallacies and false teachings that you may learn in these colleges. The Bible tells you exactly how the Indian tribes got here. Now, we know that some Asians did come through the Barren Straits, but they were trading with the Indians that were already here. Read 2nd Esdras 13 and 39.
And whereas thou sawest that he gathered another peaceable multitude unto him.
Go ahead.
Those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hoshea the king.
These are the 10 tribes that were carried away captive out of their own land during the time of Hosea the king. Go ahead.
Whom Salmanassar the king of Assyria led away captive. And he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land.
The New World. Go ahead.
But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen, and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt.
They went into a country where no mankind dwelt before that time. So that's a bold-faced lie that people were here in the Americas or in the earth millions and millions of years ago. Okay, that's straight philosophy that's coming from the Gentiles or heathens to distort the truth of the lost tribes. They went through all these different steps, be it schools and religious institutions, to hide who the lost sheep is today, to hide who the true people are. Read on.
that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land.
And they came to keep their statutes, which they didn't keep in their own land, in 2 Kings the 17th chapter. Read on.
And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow passages of the river.
Now it's showing you how they got to the Americas. They went through the Euphrates, around Africa, over the ocean. Go ahead.
For the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the flood till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half.
It took a year and a half. The Lord stilled the waters. He made sure their ships wouldn't wreck. And it took the Indian tribes, or the tribes that the Europeans called Indian, to get over to this new land we're standing in here today. We're sitting in here today. The same land we're sitting on today in America. He gave it to those Indian tribes. It took them 1 year and a half to get here to the Americas. And you're going to find out, if you go into Christopher Columbus Dialys, his own memoirs, you're going to find out that in those memoirs, it shows beyond any shadow of a doubt that Christopher Columbus used the Apocrypha in 2nd Esdras to state his case to the queen, that he knows that the lost tribes would come over to this land. So all that stuff they thought the earth was flat and all that was a bunch of garbage they were selling people in the New World. They knew that the earth was round because the Bible tells you the earth is round. But they couldn't find this land because the Lord would shipwreck them before they could get over here. The Lord held the water still for his people so that they can get over here safely. Took them 1 year and a half to get here. Read on.
And the same region is called Asareth.
It is called Asareth. What is Asareth? Asareth means hidden land. The Most High hid it from the heathen. It's the new world that was promised to God's people, Israel, who became the lost sheep. We're going to show you how they became parts of the lost sheep. How did they lose their identity? How did they lose their customs which they promised to keep when they got over here? We're going to show you. You've seen the movie Apocalypto and all the evil that they started doing, what they were learning, how they were sacrificing their own people. So they started going back into the same evil. Then something happened where they lost their identity altogether. But yes, the Indian tribes over here are highly spiritual people. Highly spiritual. They just lost their way. So we're about to go into the book of Genesis and break down beyond any shadow of a doubt who are the lost sheep of Israel. Stay tuned. Okay, now we're going to go into Genesis and identify the lost tribes or sheep of Israel. Who are they? We're going into the beginning. Let's go to Genesis 49 and 1.
Genesis 49 and 1. And Jacob called unto his sons, and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days.
He says, come on, gather together at my bed. Jacob is the father of the Israelites. His name was turned to Israel when he wrestled with an angel. So, in old times, or in biblical times, before the father dies, he hands down the blessing and the future of what will befall the children. So he called his children together before he passed and says, come, my sons, I will show you what will befall you in the last days. Now we're in the last days. So he was not talking about those children per se, but the seed of his children. What would be the condition of your children in the last days? This is how we can identify who the lost sheep are according to bloodline. Read.
Verse 2. Gather yourselves together and hear, ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father.
Israel your father. Who are the children of Israel? Read.
Reuben, thou art my firstborn.
Reuben was the firstborn. Now usually the firstborn inherits, or he's the heir or the heir of the father. He inherits all the blessings. But what happened to Reuben? Read.
Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power.
The excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Read.
Unstable as water, thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up to thy father's bed, then defoulest thou it. He went up to my couch.
He slept with his father's maid, Bilhah, and because of that he lost the promise of the firstborn. But he still had excellency and dignity. When you go into this book, I have a book here that you cannot get because it's out of print now, by Ronald Sanders, called Lost Tribes and the Promised Lands. It lets you know when the Spaniards and some of the Jewish, came over to the Americas when the Indians were here, that Reuben in Florida identified themselves as the tribe of Reuben. Now this was before Reuben lost their identity. And Reuben also identified another tribe, the tribe of Ephraim. I'm going to read a passage out of here, the Lost Tribes in the Promised Land. And this guy, Ronald Sanders, he actually went into the study trying to debunk the fact that the Indians here in the Americas, he was trying to debunk the fact that they are Israel. He tried to prove that they weren't Israelites. And through his research, going into their camp, grave grounds, going into the history, he found out the contrary. All right? And he took historical documents to put together this book. There's a passage when Montesinos came over here to the Americas, and I'm going to read it. It says, "Those Indians," he told himself, "they are Hebrews." Pondering this thought incredulously, and yet with growing conviction, he resolved that if he ever was released, he would seek out the Indian Francisco and try to learn the truth. So Montesinos was arrested, and he found out that, listen, these guys may be the Israelites. So when I get loose, I'm going to figure this story out. So he came over here. It says, Montesinos' story unclear as to the circumstances of his incarceration is equally unclear as to those of his release. But released he was, and he immediately went to Francisco. Now Francisco was an Indian, revealing himself as a Jew. Montesinos proclaimed his conviction that Francisco's hidden people were of the same race as he. Would Francisco lead him to them? The two men were soon back in the rugged mountains in which Francisco had made his initial revelation, marching relentlessly for a week before they finally came to a halt. It was a Saturday. That's the Sabbath. Montesinos makes a point of telling us, and they had come to a river larger than the Duero, and there are echoes of the Sabbatean and all of this. Here, Francisco announced, is where your brothers will be seen. Waving a banner high in the air, the Indian guide soon was greeted by a puff of smoke, the smoke signals that the Indians use here. Far beyond the other banks of the river, a response of his signal. The two men waited. Eventually, a canoe appeared, bearing 3 men and a woman, all of them Indians, to the place where Francisco and Montesinos were standing at the water's edge. So they communicated a signal to say, come on down. The Indians got in the canoe and made themselves known.